NATO halt of Russian oil would trigger price shock. Quick facts: Russia's oil exports 7.4 million barrels per day, mid 2025. Top buyers: China 50%, India, Turkey. EU imports down to 2% of total petroleum oil imports from 29% in 2021. NATO halt would remove remaining Western demand and pipeline flows. NATO countries halting Russian oil purchases would trigger one of the most significant shifts in global energy markets since the start of the Ukraine conflict in 2022. Oil and petroleum products remain Russia's largest source of foreign currency and government revenue. Cutting off access to NATO economies would not only strain Moscow's budget, but also ripple through global supply chains, driving short-term price volatility and accelerating energy diversification among NATO members. Russia's revenue hit. Oil exports provide nearly half of Russia's federal budget revenues, according to the International Energy Agency, IEA. Even after EU sanctions in 2022 and subsequent restrictions, Russia has continued to generate substantial income by rerouting flows to Asia, using discounted sales and a shadow fleet of tankers to bypass Western shipping and insurance bans. Energy is not just economics, it's leverage, said a senior analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, in a July 2025 briefing. Losing NATO markets would weaken Moscow's bargaining power, but could increase its dependence on Asia. China has become the largest buyer of Russian crude, taking in nearly half of its exports in early 2025. India follows closely, often ranking second. Turkey remains an important hub for refined oil products. But while these non-NATO buyers provide a lifeline, the loss of NATO-linked demand would force Russia to offer deeper discounts, eroding its fiscal base. Short-term global price shock. If NATO were to halt all imports simultaneously, supply reallocation would take time. Global oil prices would likely surge in the short term, with traders pricing in supply shortages and geopolitical risk premiums. The European Commission notes that EU petroleum oil imports from Russia have already dropped from 29% of extra EU imports in Q1 2021 to just 2% by mid-2025. A full NATO-wide cutoff would close the remaining pipeline routes and residual product flows. Countries still dependent on Russian supply, such as some Eastern European states, would need to rapidly retool refineries, secure alternative suppliers from the Middle East, Africa, or North America, and pay higher transport and insurance costs. Strategic realignment. The geopolitical implications are significant. By removing NATO members from its customer base, Russia would lose a key source of leverage. This could alter bargaining dynamics in conflicts like Ukraine, while deepening Moscow's reliance on China and India. For NATO economies, the move could act as a stress test for resilience. The US and Canada, both net energy exporters, could supply allies, while Gulf producers such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE would gain market share. LNG exporters, including the US and Qatar, would likely see accelerated demand in Europe, reinforcing infrastructure build-out for regasification and storage. Energy transition momentum. In the longer term, the disruption could fast-track NATO's energy transition. Policymakers would face mounting pressure to insulate economies from oil price shocks by scaling renewables, advancing electrification, and investing in efficiency. Analysts note that EU member states have already expanded solar and wind capacity at record levels since 2022, while the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is catalyzing clean energy investment. IRA is still likely to increase clean energy investment under Trump, but probably unevenly and incompletely. Some pillars will hold, others may be weakened or scaled back. The result is a more uncertain environment. Investors will likely focus on projects and incentives with greater legislative protection or bipartisan support, while more speculative or vulnerable incentives might see cuts or stricter eligibility. Every supply crisis accelerates the transition away from fossil dependence, said an IEA report earlier this year. Security and decarbonization are increasingly aligned. Risks and unintended consequences. Still, risks remain. High oil prices could fuel inflation, triggering political backlash in NATO countries and adding strain to households and industries. Russia could retaliate through cyber or hybrid measures targeting critical energy infrastructure. And non-NATO importers may not fully absorb Russian output, leaving volumes stranded. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites presented by E plus E Leader. For partnership opportunities, reach out to a member of our team.